start off tonight because I don't know that you really understand Nebuchadnezzar. And I found this verse, and this really helps us understand who Nebuchadnezzar is. Okay, and it's in Jeremiah 39, verse 6. It says, "Then the king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes." He killed the king's boys right in front of him. The king of Babylon also slaughtered all the nobles of Judah. He then blinded Zedekiah's eyes and bound him in fetters of bronze to bring him to Babylon. But he made him watch his own boys be slaughtered. This is the kind of man you're dealing with Nebuchadnezzar. He's also noted as a very wise man, one of the most wise men that ever lived, a very powerful, wise leader. We're in Daniel chapter 1, and this same Nebuchadnezzar has besieged Jerusalem. And Jehoiakim is the king at this time, and he took these 70 boys, and he's taken them into captivity. And Daniel is obviously the key guy that we're going to be studying. The Bible has a book in the Bible named after him, and we're going to continue verse by verse of this story. And so we finished up last time talking about that the commander of the officials changed the names of Daniel and them. He gave them a daily diet, choice food and wines that the king would eat, and he's going to educate them for 3 years. So that's where we left off. All these boys, these Jewish boys, have been taken captive into Babylon, and he's going to completely twist them from everything they've ever been taught, and he's going to change them to Babylonian ways, and then they're going to in turn begin to train all the other Jewish people, because this is 605. He'll go back in 597, and he'll go back again in 586 BC until he finally destroys the temple and everything and brings them all into captivity to Babylon. So Daniel and these youths, these young men, we don't know for sure the exact age of Daniel, but MacArthur seems to think he's 14. Others have thought anywhere up to 17 or 18. So he's a teenage boy. And I was just telling Brady, I said, you pay attention tonight, because this young man's probably about the same age as Brady and Jacob, and I don't know who, even Cannon. I mean, I don't know. He's one of our young boys' age, and he's just been taken from his family and taken into captivity. And this is what the king is going to do. Now, tonight we're going to look at verse 8. So go ahead and open your Bibles, or you can look on the screen at Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. And we're going to read through, tonight we're going to study through verse 14. So I'm going to go ahead and read those so we get a picture of what's going on, and then we'll go back and look at each verse. It says, "But Daniel said in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel loving kindness and compassion before the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed before you, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. So right off the bat we see there, it says, But Daniel said in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine. This is really a most important thing that you need to understand about Daniel before we even go through the whole rest of the book. Right there it tells you. First time we start talking about, what does it say about him? He set in his heart. He made up his mind. Daniel's quick to stand up for God. The king, they've come in, this commander has taken him captive. He's come in and said, hey, we're going to make you eat. We're going to give you the king's best food. Now I want you in your minds to just think about it. Bradley and Brady and Cannon and Jacob, all you boys here tonight. And I want you to think about, you go out to a nice place to eat, and there's a big old nice ribeye steak, or there's a big old rack of ribs, or they got a little bowl of some grain and some lettuce and some carrots. Which one do you want? I hope all of y'all are going to answer like I'm thinking you're going to answer. You're going to tear into that big steak, aren't you? Right? So it seems like a minor deal. Who cares? Eat whatever the king gives. It don't matter. King's steaks, the king's wine. Why is that a big deal? But he's quick to stand up for God. And we're going to find out that he couldn't eat those things. Why couldn't he eat those things? Well, I'm not going to get into a big, long Bible study tonight on Leviticus. But you can go look in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy, and it lays out the detailed instructions of what God had told Moses. You tell these people, my people, do not eat these things. It's a command of God. Daniel knew it. He was raised up, okay? All these years he's been taught what God had commanded. Now he's far away from home. His mom and daddy's not there. It's just a bunch of other kids. He could have easily said, hey, nobody will know. Give me the steak. I'm going to do whatever this man tells me to do, because what did I read to you in the beginning about what kind of man Nebuchadnezzar is? The man slaughtered these kids in front of their own daddy and then gouged out his eyes. So that's the kind of man you're dealing with. Daniel already knew that story. He already knew who Nebuchadnezzar was, but he quickly said, I'm not going to defile myself. I'm not going to do it. And you know what? Nobody's there making him do that. He chose that in his own heart to stand up for God and said, you know what? I'm not going to compromise. He was quick to stand up for God. Daniel shows us he's not afraid to die. Because saying this to that leader, to that commander, for Daniel to say, I'm not going to do it, that could have got him killed. So he's not afraid to die. It also shows us that Daniel trusts more in the promises of God that he's been taught in his life than he feared losing his life. He trusted God. Daniel shows us an example of what it means to be faithful in the little things. If you won't be faithful in little things, you won't be faithful in bigger things. If you'll be faithful in the little things, you'll be faithful in the bigger things. That's what the New Testament teaches us, right? That's right, showing his integrity, because nobody was there making him stand up to this king. It was he purposed in his heart. He says he'd set his heart that he would not defile himself. By the way, food to us, it wouldn't seem like a big deal. Why? Because one of the things I'm most thankful for in all the Bible is when that sheet came down. When that sheet came down, yeah, some of y'all are like, what are you talking about? You need to go read the book of Acts. Peter saw that sheet come down, and that meant what? You can eat ribs, boys. You can eat steak. You can eat fish. You can eat it all. You can even eat, you can eat beans if you want to. I don't know why you would. See, that reminds me. You know what the first sin was? Eating. Eating something that God had said don't eat. God only gave one law. Don't eat of the fruit of that tree. And they disobeyed. But Daniel here says, no, I'm not going to disobey. God said, don't eat those meats. Also, Daniel knew that this is a pagan land. All pagans, they sacrificed their food and wine to fake gods. And there was no way you're going to get a Jew to eat meat that had already been sacrificed to idols. So he wasn't going to eat it. And like I said, if you really want to know about all the hoofed animals and you couldn't eat a rabbit, you couldn't eat a camel. I mean, all these different things it goes through. You can go read in Leviticus. I just chose not to list all of that. It tells you what you could and couldn't eat. But Daniel, last week, had his name changed. Wasn't nothing he could do about that, right? Man just comes in and says, your name's now Belteshazzar. Daniel couldn't change that, could he? He couldn't do anything about it. The man said, we're going to make you go to school for 3 years. We're going to train you for 3 years. Y'all can teach me all you want. He couldn't stop that, right? He couldn't stop him from teaching him. But what could he control? He could control this. And he said in his heart, I'm not going to defile myself. Now, if he'd have went along with the king's request, then he might as well have been looking at God and saying, I don't need you anymore. To defile himself in what Daniel's talking about, what in this time, you might have heard of a word called abomination. That's an abomination to God, okay? That's right up there with, the Bible lists many things that are an abomination to God. And defiling himself by eating these meats is the same thing. So he might as well say, God, I'm done with you. I'm going with King Nebuchadnezzar. That if he eats this meat, that's what he's saying, in essence. And he's done. So, what do we see right off the bat with Daniel? And I want to stress to you, no compromise. At 14, 15 years old, he made up his mind. It's one thing I wish I could get through if I could go back to my 14, 15-year-old self. Wouldn't you tell them? Don't compromise. Don't trust this world. It looks good. It sounds fun. You think you want it. But all it's going to do is destroy you. It's going to hurt you. You know, I was telling the young people in youth class many times, how many young people you know, look around in your community, even in the church family, that come from broken homes. You'd think you'd be tired of it, right? If you go God's way, it's a different way. So don't compromise. Don't give in. Don't trust the lies of this world. You follow what God has commanded, and God will bless you. In fact, look at verse 9. You'll see exactly a promise that I'm telling you that God does. So Daniel said in his heart that he's not going to defile himself. And then look at verse 9. What does God do as soon as he sees Daniel's choice? It says, now God granted Daniel loving kindness and compassion before the commander of the officials. Okay? God blesses Daniel's faithfulness. Just like that. He takes that old pagan's heart and he changes it. And he put compassion and loving kindness. This is a man, I mean, that Jewish slave boy is no different than a rabid dog coming in. He could care less about this kid. Just kill him and give me another one. But God did this. Now we're seeing the sovereignty of God take place here. And then in verse 10 it says, and the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. Why in the world would this commander, this leader, start just, oh my goodness, telling all his fears to this slave? He don't owe this boy anything, does he? It sounds to me like he's not in control. Who's more in control? Daniel. It'd be like if, Chad, if you were going to whip Maddie, or Hannah, if you were going to whip Hannah, you come up and she starts giving you reasons, and you start, well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have thought that way. I really wish I didn't have to do that. You're not, I mean, then she's in control. She's twisted you around, right? That's what's happening here, because we know that, I mean, it's a bad example. We couldn't use Maddie, I know. But, you know, I mean, Belle, could you imagine if you talked your daddy out of spanking you? Ain't going to happen, is it? Why? Because he's in control. This commander who could have killed this slave kid is all sitting here saying, I'm worried. I'm afraid of my Lord the King. Well, what did we read in Jeremiah? He should be afraid of the Lord the King. Daniel wasn't, was he? A 14, 15-year-old kid said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to eat that food. I don't care if you kill me. But this commander, one of his own, is afraid. So we see right here that God is in control of this. You see what God has done? God's changed the heart of this guy, and now he's putting Daniel, you know, in the position of leadership here. This is what God does to us as Christians, guys. What do I tell you all the time? You're the wisest people on the planet. You know this right here? You silence the mouths of fools. There's nothing. I'm telling you, you can go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, you can go anywhere you want to. You know this right here, and you will silence them. There is no one on this planet with all the science and astrology and medical knowledge and things that they learn, historical knowledge. No one compares to someone who knows the truth of God's Word. That's an absolute truth. I'm telling you that. You will stump them every... Let me give you an example. It wasn't until, over 1,000 years that they realized that the earth was round. Isaiah told them back there, 2,000 years before, it hung by a string, right? I mean, if you go through the Bible, you can see many things that science didn't figure out till many thousands of years later. That's just a little example. Plus, we talk about the prophecies all the time, right? So the commander is telling this slave his fears. He's not in control. Now look at verse 11. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You know their new names now are what? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I told you you'll always remember those names. He said in verse 12, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Now, what I thought was interesting here, and it's very important, relevant to us today as Christians. Look how he starts off his statement to this commander. He's just realized this guy's confessing his fears to him. He knows that this guy's not acting like a commander, but does he take advantage of it? Look how he starts off. He says what? Please. Kindness. Daniel doesn't act ugly. He didn't demand. He didn't fight. He didn't get smart-aleck. He didn't get rude. What he simply does is he kindly offers a suggestion. Now you're seeing this wisdom I was telling you about with Daniel. 14, 15-year-old boy, just like, he didn't have somebody over here coaching him, did he? Hey, you can trick this guy. Let's set it up. Let's let some of y'all eat salad and some of y'all eat steak, and we'll see who looks the strongest after 10 days. It's also interesting that he says there, vegetables to eat for 10 days and water to drink. Do you really think that teenage boys, if you took this side over here and just gave them, all right, you two are just going to eat salad for the next 10 days. Grain, it's not just lettuce and, I wrote down the word, but it's zoroa is the word, the Greek word. It doesn't have to be lettuce, okay? It's anything that's kind of comes from a plant. It's like plant life. So it could be grain from wheat. So there's a lot of things that this could be. It's just not meat. So you guys are going to eat seeds and grass and lettuce and carrots. And, beans for the next 10 days. All right? Gina, you got that? Matt, you got that? That's all they're eating for the next 10 days. You boys over here, steak and ribs. Huh? Yeah. Church, y'all see all these men moving over. I said boys. You men are done, right? So after 10 days, we're going to come back and look at y'all and see if y'all are any different. I really don't think you'd notice a big difference in a teenage boy after 10 days. I know, I may be wrong. Huh? Some of the men we'd see a big change. So, but he doesn't demand it. He doesn't act ugly or rude. What do we read in 1 Corinthians 13 about, it's not unbecoming, not puffed up? I mean, there is no reason for us as Christians to be rude or condescending or demanding or ugly or smart-aleck to other people. Daniel shows good wisdom and means you trust God no matter what situation you find yourself in. I know God will get me out of it. What did Abraham do? The father of faith, right? He trusted God. God said, kill your son. Okay, I trust you, God. I don't know why you'd ask me to do that, but that's what you told me to do, so I'll do it. See, that's an example. Daniel goes down in history. Daniel, Noah, and Abraham go down in history, some of the greatest men in the Bible. Now, Spurgeon said, talking about this kind of character, not to be a person who's looking to fight or be smart-aleck or rude or anything, take advantage of it. Spurgeon said, be a martyr if you like, but don't martyr everyone. Right? You get that? That's what, didn't Jesus teach us? Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. If one strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek to them, right? It's a completely different mindset that a born-again Christian should have. I was telling a man this week who's going through a hard time. And I said, let me tell you what happens. You're growing in the Lord, and you're seeing His promises. You're learning to trust in Him, and all of a sudden the trials come, the tests come. Something's hurting you, and it's tough. It's a rough thing. I don't know this man and woman who's watching their child tonight, and unless the Lord intervenes, I don't know them, but I know that that's a heavy trial that they're in right now. I know how their hearts feel. I mean, it's just, you're speechless almost. I mean, is this really happening? But I said, when you grow in Christ, you really start walking after Him, you're going to respond to trials different. Maybe 2 years ago, you're going through what you're going through right now. You might have busted every window in your house and punched every holes in the wall, or you want to cuss and scream and just tear stuff up. But today, in front of me, you're crying. Why? Because God's changing you. You're responding differently to threats or to trials that come in your life. Look how Daniel's responding to this test that's coming in his life. In fact, he sees, I could take advantage of this man right now. But he doesn't demand. He just offers a suggestion. He says in verse 13, let our appearance be observed before you in the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So, we're going to go 10 days eating what we like to eat, 10 days eating what we don't want to eat. And at the end, we're going to see who looks the best, okay? And then in verse 14, and we'll wrap it up here, and we'll talk about what you noticed next week. He said, so he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. So Daniel's wisdom, his quick thinking, his complete trust in God paid off for him, didn't it? His obedience, it paid off for him. And now this eunuch, he's called, had no obligation to Daniel or these other kids at all. He didn't owe them anything. He had no reason to even have this conversation. He could have just said, eat it or die. Right? When I was growing up, eat it or starve, right? That's what we're serving. That's what you're going to eat. And he made me eat that whole plate of beans. And I took a whole gallon of tea and chased him down. He never made me do it again. But he had no reason to even have that conversation. What we're seeing here, guys, is that God takes control of all things that He wants to. We learned that on Sunday morning, didn't we, recently? You know, sometimes with His will, right, His different wills that God has, sometimes He says He's not willing that any would perish, but all, right? And that God desires that all men to be saved. Well, we know that not all men will be saved. Does that mean that God's not sovereign? Well, of course not. God is sovereign, but He doesn't always make everything happen that He wants to happen. But He can. God can do anything. There's nothing that God can't do. God is in absolute control. So, in closing, I wanted to remind you of some of the points that I picked up on about Daniel that we need to take with us. Is that God's people make a stand. If you haven't been that person yet in your Christian life, learn to be that person. Make a stand. Young people, I'm pleading with you, start early. Don't wait till you've messed up a whole bunch. And you know, I always tell them, protect your past. Protect your past right now. Young ladies, protect your past. Young men, protect your past. 20 years from now, you want to be looking back and saying, you know, I'm so proud that I did this, that I did that. And I tell you, your children are going to benefit from it. And their children are going to benefit from it. Break the cycles. Start now. Be like Daniel and make a stand. God's people have no fear of what man can do to the body. Remember the Bible says, do not fear what man can do to the body, but fear what God can do to the soul. You will live eternally. One thing I've stressed to the young people on Wednesday nights is that there will never be a moment that you're not conscious. When you die, you're still going to be conscious. You're either going to be in eternal torment, pain and suffering, and blackness. Ain't going to be walking around talking to people. You're in outer darkness. There's no light. There's no talking with other people. You're alone, isolated in pain and misery for eternity. It never ends. That's what we should fear. And another one, God's people love Christ more than this world. And that's something that you have to make a conscious effort every day. No matter how you're being tested, no matter what comes upon you, what temptations come, maybe it's an opportunity. You think it's a great opportunity but it's going to take you out of God's will. I mean, if you look at it from Daniel's perspective, the king's food, the king's wine, set up in the palace, fixing to be a leader. I mean, it's all looking good for him. All he's got to do is just compromise. Just play along. And Daniel's set up for life. But he won't do it. He won't do it. All right. So I'm wanting to leave you guys some time for comments, questions, or anything up to this point that we've talked about in the book of Daniel that you might want to add to or take away or whatever. Go ahead, Maddie.